Hi everyone, and welcome to Bradford Cloud User Group's July Meetup. I'll give a quick rundown of what's going to happen this evening, and then we'll hand over to our first speaker. So the first session will be by Katy Nicholson, Microsoft MVP, overview of Microsoft Endpoint Analytics. We'll have some Q&A. If you've got any questions during the session, just put them in the chat. The second session will be Microsoft Defender by Viktor Hedberg. Again, we'll have a QA session. And then put the QA in the chat, and we'll ask the questions at the end of each session. I'll just quickly hand over to Katy.
Oh, there we go. Sorry, I'm just trying to remember how to share something on Teams.
No, that's fine.
Okay, PowerPoint.
Hi, Viktor. Thank you for joining. Welcome, everyone.
How are you, Viktor? You okay? You've joined.
Yeah, I'm doing very well, thanks.
We can see your screen now, Katy.
Right, okay, good. So we've had loads of problems with Teams today, so hopefully we'll be okay. Okay. So I'm Katy Nicholson, Microsoft Enterprise Mobility MVP. And in the day when I'm not on holiday, I'm systems manager at an independent school. So I've been working there for about 16 years, running the entire network basically. Hyper-V, config manager, Active Directory, 365, Azure, all that kind of stuff. I usually post technical content on my blog, which is linked on my slide, and my Twitter's on there as well. So today I'm going to talk through Endpoint Analytics, which is part of Endpoint Manager, aka Intune, what it is, how to set it up, why you'd want to do that, and some screenshots from a real life environment rather than just looking at it in a lab. You really do need some proper data for it to not look, empty and boring. So it's a tool to show you various statistics on your device performance. The main use I find for this is determining which PCs have got issues, slow boot up or log on times, that kind of thing. Devices frequently having applications crash. It's really good for spotting devices where there could be an issue that the end user just ignores rather than telling you about it, like slow log on, that kind of thing, or frequent crashing. So by default, it will report on cloud managed devices in Intune. We can also include config manager devices if we turn on tenant attach or if you've got co-management turned on. You need the EMS E3 or E5 or Microsoft 365 E3 or E5 or the academic versions of the license. And to start gathering data, you need the Intune service administrator role. For viewing the data, you need read permissions on the Endpoint Analytics organization category, or help desk operator, or the EMS Intune role. So if you've got any content filtering or firewall rules in front of your devices, you need to make sure they can get to the endpoints, graph.windows.net and manage.microsoft.com and events.data.microsoft.com. And it's hidden away in Endpoint Manager Admin Center under the Reports tab, and then Endpoint Analytics. Or there's a short link there as well. So you see the introduction screen once you first open it. So you can select what do you want to install it for. So all cloud managed devices will just create a data collection profile. for pretty much any Windows 10 device, because no one should be on anything older than 1903 these days. If you pick selected devices, you can pick the devices you want. Put them in a group. And if you choose to do it later, it doesn't set anything up really. All you can use is the proactive remediation feature. And you can change these later if you want. Once you've turned it on, it takes a few days before anything comes through. So yeah, find something else to do for 3 days once you press the button. So by default, we've targeted Intune managed devices. As I said, we can include config manager ones with co-management or tenant attach, which is in the config manager console as shown there through administration, cloud services, co-management, and follow the wizard. And there's a couple of tick boxes you have to pick there, which are the that upload to Microsoft Endpoint Manager Admin Center and the Endpoint Analytics one. You don't need to have moved any workloads over, so you can still just have everything running in Config Manager if you want. And if you don't want to upload data for every single device and you've got multiple client settings policies, you can configure this per settings policy, which is in the computer agent bit there. One of these down at the bottom is enable Endpoint Analytics collection. So it will set up a data collection profile in Intune, which looks like this. It basically just sets 2 settings up for us to enable health monitoring for Endpoint Analytics. There's one other option in there under scope for Windows updates, but that isn't selected when we do this, so we'll leave that off. And it's assigned to all devices by default, unless you picked specific devices on the first screen. So assuming you've waited patiently for a few days, you'll be able to go back into Endpoint Analytics and start to see some data. The overview will show you a score for all devices in scope. You can configure baselines, which on these, that little grey arrow is, I don't know if you, oops, I don't know if you can see the mouse, is the baseline. I lost where I was up to now by clicking that. Yes. So you can set up multiple baselines, which basically snapshot your current performance, so you can compare how you're doing now to how you were doing, I don't know, 2 weeks ago or whatever. Ignore the filter box, that only applies to Microsoft Managed Desktop. And you'll get a score for each category and some recommendations. On this tenancy, we're 99% config manager, so we get all these alerts telling us to use Intune, which we're going to ignore. So I'm going to go through the reports on the side. Those, so four reports there. There are some more in preview to do with Windows 365, but I don't have any screenshots of those at the moment. But it is being expanded. So startup performance will show you an overall score, how it compares to the baseline, and break it down into boot and sign in. So you can see if you've got a slow boot but a fast sign in or whatever. Beneath that, you've got the average startup times for each of the phase of boot. So it's a good idea of how things are being slowed down. So for example, if you've got group policy doing a lot, that will show up there. And you can break it down further by model. So you might see we've got some old devices taking ages to boot. You can break it down per device as well. This does work on Windows 10 Pro, but they require a KB installing. I'm not sure which one it is. Enterprise and Education, it works straight off 1903 or later. Home and long-term channel not supported. And if you've got devices enrolled through Config Manager, you need version 2006 of the client. Boot up scores don't include any time spent on Windows Update, and the sign-in data doesn't include the first sign-in immediately following a feature update, because that would, skew the results, skew the data quite poorly. So I've skipped the model tab because it's basically the same as this, but grouped per model. So here we've got some of our devices, and you can see our worst one at the top there has got a 504-second sign-in time. And this is data from the last 30 days with your restart and blue screens. So this one here is actually a 13-year-old desktop, so we'd expect it to take forever. And it will also highlight any machines you've not got solid-state drives in. And we had one where we'd missed a PC out from the upgrade cycle, which really stuck out with 20-minute login. And if you click on an individual PC, you can see the startup performance and app reliability data. So here we get boot and sign-in speed history, along with the processes which were impacting on startup speed, history of restarts. Application reliability tab at the top will show us which applications are crashing, but I'll look at that a bit later on when I go into the full detail of that section. And back on the startup processes tab, this will show us which processes are causing delays to starting up, if they're impacting at least 10 devices. The total delay shown is added up for all the affected devices. So in this case, PowerShell's taking 20 minutes delay over 275 devices. Which is our logon scripts, which we can't really get rid of at the moment. And restart frequency, which I think is on the right-hand side of the slide, is the last 30 days worth of restarts. What caused them? So blue screen, holding down the power button, updates, restarts, shutdown. And then what's probably the most useful bit of this is proactive remediation, which will let you create and run script packages on devices. So it can be set up to detect and repair frequently encountered support issues across your devices, potentially detecting and resolving issues before your users notice them, reducing support calls to your help desk. So each one contains a detection script and a remediation script. It's all done in PowerShell, so that should be nice and familiar to us. There's a couple of built-in ones, one which restarts the Office Click to Run service, and one which updates group policy. I'm not too much use, but we get to look at them and see how they're actually working based on the examples, and then we can write our own. So when setting up the script, you can specify if you want it to be run as the logged on user or not. If you run it as a logged on user, you're pretty limited because it won't have system privileges, but you might need to do that. So the way this works is on your devices, the Intune management extension service retrieves the scripts from Intune and executes them. The default is once every 24 hours. You can then assign them to all users, all devices, selected groups, the same way you'd normally assign things in Intune. And you can also pick the frequency, so you can have it to run once or hourly or daily. You can say, every 6 hours or every 3 days at 2 AM if you wanted to. The client devices need to be Azure AD joined or hybrid joined and licensed with enterprise or education E3 or E5 or A3 or A5, or virtual desktop access E3 or E5. Don't know if it'll work on Windows 10 Pro. It might do if you've got EMS E3 or E5 licensing, but I'm not sure. So this is one of the built-in remediation policies, which is the group policy one. So looking through this should show you how it works, get you thinking about where you could use this. So there's a detection and a remediation script for each one. So in this case, we are checking if group policy update was in the last week based off a registry key. We just do a different return value based on whether we want to remediate or not. So 1 if we want the remediate script to run, or 0 if we don't. And then on the remediate script, you just, in this example, it's updating group policy and checking it's been successful, and return code 0 if it has. And from the console, you'll be able to see how many devices have no issues, or if there's issues found, it will run the remediation script, and you'll be able to see if any have failed. And you can also get CSV with all the console output from both the scripts. So everything in here where it says write host will appear in CSV. So you can have a look at that offline, which is quite a new feature, but that's quite useful. So a few different possible uses for these. You could, well, there's the built-in examples. You could check for certificates nearing expiry and give some detail for further action. You could check for last computer restart. If it's been a while, pop up a notification to the user. I think that was an example I saw on msendpointmanager.com. As it's just PowerShell running on the device, you can invoke toast notifications or even bring up Windows Forms. I've seen one on workplacescode.com which detects duplicate desktop shortcuts for Edge and Teams, which if you've got OneDrive folder redirected in a specific way, you'll find they build up every time you log on, and gets rid of those. Or you could look for instances of an application installed by the user, so it'd be in app data, and get rid of them. Make sure regular AV scans have been run if you're using something other than Defender, which is built into Intune. So like a third-party one, which you can control by running PowerShell or poking an exe. You can enforce local group membership, or you could update user account status, e.g. disabling the built-in administrator account. And the one we're using at the moment is adding network printers on our surfaces, which are not on the domain. They're just Azure AD joined with a remediation policy to stick the network printers on. So yeah, there's loads of things we can use this for. And a few requirements. So you need to be UTF-8 encoded. Maximum output size is 2K at the moment. So if you've got a more complex script, make sure you're not putting too much output, or you'll miss bits out of your CSV export. Signature checks. When you create the package, you can specify whether to enforce this. If you do, it will run under the device's PowerShell execution policy, and if you don't, it runs under bypass. The default policy is restricted for Windows 10 or remote sign for Windows Server. So if you're enforcing this, your script has to be signed with a certificate in the trusted publisher's store on your device. Otherwise, it won't work. So I typically just don't enforce this to get it to run as bypass. And 2 built-in scripts are already signed. So if you want those, they'll just work And when you create the script package, there's an option for 64-bit PowerShell if you need that. Recommended software screen, which is not quite as useful. It gives us a few score categories and the percentages of our device in each of them. So we've got levels of Windows 10 adoption, cloud identity, cloud management, and how many are in autopilot. So basically 1, because this is our config manager tenancy. With a few insights at the bottom. Hopefully this will eventually show us our Windows 11 deployment progress. That's just a guess. I don't know. I've not heard anything about that yet, but it would be a good use for this screen. And application reliability, it's in preview at the moment, or it was when I wrote this. I've not had a look recently, but it will show you which applications are crashing for your end users. So you get an overall app reliability score across all the devices on your tenant. And you'll see the top apps which are reducing productivity with data based on the past 14 days. Clicking on the app name will show some more detailed information, which we'll have a look at in a minute. And the reliability score for each application is the relative reliability of that application in your tenant. So it's calculated from the mean time to failure and total usage duration values. So 0 is a rubbish app and 100 is a really good one. And the app performance tab will show us data for each app. So that includes foreground applications with a decent amount of usage, applications with more than 5 devices or more than 2% of the device count, whichever's higher. And when calculating the scores, a maximum of 10 crash events are used per application, per device, per day to stop huge amounts of data from the extreme cases skewing the data. And here we can see the applications which have been in use on your devices in the last 14 days, a count of how many devices they were active on with total usage. If there's been any crashes, you'll also see the total crashes in the last 14 days, along with the calculated mean time to failure. And again, the app reliability score 0 to 100. And clicking on an app will open a window showing which versions are causing issues. So in this case, we've got Microsoft Education with a couple of different versions, one crashing and one not. And the OS versions tab will show us the versions of Windows it was running on. So you might be able to narrow down if it's a specific version of an app crashing all the time, or if it's any version on a specific version of Windows, to decide whether you want to do a rollback or take some other action. And the model and device performance screens are basically the same. So this is the device performance screen, which will show the details for each device with a reliability score. And clicking on the device name will show its individual data. So as with the other screens, we can sort this by each column. So we could bring total app crashes to the top. And looking at the model performance, we could see if there's a specific device model which is particularly rubbish. And then the individual devices application reliability screen will show you what crashed and when on the device you clicked on. And unlike the other screens, it isn't restricted to the last 14 days. So you can select a specific date range with the filter button. And it doesn't show you version detail, but you can still discover what's crashing and how often. In this case, Photoshop crashed in May. So you might be able to tie that together with reports from an end user to work out what exactly is going wrong. Baselines, as I said earlier, if you create a baseline, it basically takes a snapshot of your current scores. So in a few weeks, you can look back at whether you've got better or worse. The default one, all organizations, is what Microsoft describes as a typical enterprise. So it scores from all enrolled organizations across all of Microsoft, everyone using it, anonymized and aggregated. There's an opt-out button for this if you don't want your data included. You can have 20 baselines, I think. And with your regression threshold, that will determine whether they show up as regressed or not. Yeah. And a couple of known issues. With application reliability, which is in preview. They both affect config manager clients only. So the first is that some devices might fail to upload data where the data generated is too big. It resumes when the data is a bit smaller. So you might skip a day's data maybe. And that's it's fixed in a config manager update rollup. I think it's on the most recent one. The other one is a rare issue to do with service certificate policy. There's a script to fix this on the Microsoft docs, but it's a really rare issue. And make sure your devices meet the prerequisites, they're actively being used, and they've had sufficient time to report data before assuming one of those is the cause. And on last screen, troubleshooting co-managed devices. Intune managed devices are unlikely to cause any issues as long as there's no proxy or firewall blocking their access to their endpoint. And looking at co-managed devices, we've got a few logs we can look through. We've got the UX Analytics upload worker log on the config manager site server. I've not got one with any errors to show what to look for, but they should be full of successful web requests. If you've got any failures, I'd expect it to tell you the endpoints it was trying to contact. So when configuring any firewalls, you need to make sure you've definitely got those endpoints with the wildcards allowed through. You've got to make sure you have the data upload ticked in your co-management settings. There's a couple of client logs in C Windows CCM logs. Sensor endpoint will show you any issues with the device uploading to the site server. And sensor managed provider will check for problems processing boot events. And finally, don't forget your devices all need a restart to fully enable Endpoint Analytics once it's been set up. So as I mentioned earlier briefly, there is going to be some Windows 365 Cloud PC integration with Endpoint Analytics. You'll be able to see performance bottlenecks and bump up the Cloud PC specs if you need to. If you've not heard about Windows 365 yet, which I think everyone has by now, it was announced on the 14th of July, and it simplifies virtual desktop deployment and ties into Endpoint Manager. And you can find out more at microsoft.com/windows-365. So yeah, I hope that quite detailed look into Endpoint Analytics was interesting or useful. I would have liked to do some demos, but with the nature of this, you have to really have live data, and I can't really demo on the tenant that's got the live data. But yeah, so if there's any questions or anything, and don't forget to check out my blog and follow me on Twitter.
Hi, Katie. Thank you for the session.
Let's have a look at the chat. And oh no, no questions. Okay.
I've got a question for you, Katie, whilst Mohammed types away. You know the data when it upstreams from your end client. So if you're sitting at home, you're going out your internet breakout, you're going, is that aggregated data in a 24-hour period? Because it's not live streamed, is it, up to the analytics service? So how do they decide what data to collect?
It's not live. So we're thinking more of something managed by Intune rather than Config Manager.
Yeah, so you don't have config manager. You've enrolled your device directly into Azure AD, and you register Azure AD. You register into Intune, so you got a Windows 10 device.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming, based on what you said, and correct me if I'm wrong, it can still collect data from that Windows 10 device.
Yes, if
yeah.
that device is enrolled in Intune and you've turned on Endpoint Analytics.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's a daily upload of data, so it will basically aggregate throughout the day in the background and throw that up to Endpoint Analytics.
Okay.
Whereas Config Manager does the same, but through the site server.
Okay. So site server being on-prem.
Yes, if you're using Config Manager clients.
Okay.
But you don't need Config Manager. So if you're just doing it through Intune, it goes, and it's got a different endpoint it uses, but Intune your device will send the data straight into Intune.
So, in a given scenario where, most people are working from home and you're using core management, so it uses the Insight server, does a Windows 10 device need to talk to the Insight server, or can it talk directly to the analytics service?
If your devices aren't enrolled in Intune because they're still on Config Manager, they will have to be able to talk to the site server, which they will be able to do if you've got Cloud Management Gateway set up. But if your devices are on Intune, then they will just upload straight to Intune, and they don't need the site server.
Okay. So in a core managed scenario, with SCCM on-prem and Intune, so you're core managing, that way
Yeah.
the machine can talk directly to the analytics service, can't it? I assume, based on what I've read and based on what you said, because
I think so, yeah.
you can talk directly into Intune, yeah.
You could tell Sad's working on a project. He's trying to get some information out of you.
Yeah, no, I like Intune. It's just some of the stuff I've been looking at.
I know. It's your favorite area, this, isn't it?
It is. But no, there don't seem to be any other questions. So if everybody can come off mute and give Katy a big round of applause for that great session. Thank you, Katy.
Thank you very much. It was a great session.
Great, thanks.
Next, I know Saj has done introductions already, but for those who have joined, I would like to introduce Viktor Hedberg. I believe I've pronounced that properly. He's travelled virtually all the way from Sweden.
Yeah.
He is a security architect. He's got a massive passion for Microsoft technologies like we all have. He's a Microsoft certified trainer. And today he's presenting on implementing RBAC in Microsoft Defender. So over to yourself, Viktor.
Yeah, thanks for that introduction. Let me just make sure I got the tech stuff working. I've been on holiday for far too long, starting to forget how to share stuff. There we go. Perhaps. Yeah, I believe you all can see my screen now. So yeah. This session, we're gonna take a little dive into how to implement role-based access control in Microsoft Defender. But before we get started with, this is going to be a quite demo-heavy session, so we'll get to know the details and stuff like that. But just to fill in a little bit more information about myself. My name is Viktor Hedberg. I work as a security architect, security consultant, security advisor. A love child goes by many names, right? At TrueSec here in Sweden, and I've been working with identity and access management and IT security within the Microsoft hemisphere for at least 8 years. I don't know exactly how many years it's been, but yeah, it's in the realm of 8 to 10 years, so something like that. And I'm currently focusing heavily on both identity and access management, as well as the Microsoft security stack in both Microsoft 365 and Azure. You can see some links to my LinkedIn page, my blog, my Twitter page. Feel free to connect, follow, read my blog, stuff like that. But why use role-based access control in Microsoft Defender? Well, each and every Azure AD tenant does get their global administrator role, their security administrator role, their privileged role administrator, stuff like that. But these roles in themselves are very powerful. They can do loads of things. And why we shouldn't use them is because they are powerful. A global admin is more likely to try to get breached. We see it in a lot of our incidents with our customers that people are using, synchronized Active Directory accounts with global administrator permissions in Azure AD, stuff like that. So we should always try to limit the usage of these roles, basically. I know this is not news for anyone here, but repetition kind of helps in these scenarios. And what role-based access control in Azure AD brings to the table in this is that not only do we get a more controlled fashion on who gets access to which part of our security features, but we can also utilize the entitlement management, identity governance features in Azure AD to make sure that access is governed properly. So quite simply, in order to implement this, of course, you do need to have the licensing requirements for using Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Identity, Defender for Office 365. So we're talking about the E5 capabilities here, but the same kind of thought could be, implemented on each and every Azure Active Directory there is. But what differs this kind of approach from your normal Active Directory setup is that we'll be going to use privileged access groups, PAGs, or what do you want to call them? Basically, an Azure AD group, which we have said, this group can be assigned to specific roles in our Azure AD tenant. And why we want to use these, I'll explain later. But you do need to tick that box that says this group can be assigned to roles. And when we're talking about this role-based access control, try not to assign these groups even more permissions in your Azure AD. So when we're building this kind of structure or aligning our strategy towards RBAC, we try to keep it as small as possible so that this group grants permission to do this thing only. We do not want to have like 15 groups which have they have roles in Defender for Endpoint, they have roles in Defender for Identity, as well as security administrator or anything like that. So try to keep it clean as much as possible. And this is the why we want to use the PAGs or the privileged access groups, because by default, only global administrators and privileged role administrators can manage these groups, unless you specify that this group for the tier 1 endpoint analysts does have a group owner, then the group owner is in charge of administering the membership of the group. But other than that, the sole responsibility is on global administrator and privileged role administrator. And why is this important? Yeah, we don't want our help desk administrators or our groups administrators or any other role in Azure AD which have the right permissions to the groups to either maliciously or I'm getting lost for words here. So they don't, unintentionally manage these groups or update them in a way that we're not comfortable with. And when it comes to, identifying which groups in our Azure AD tenant are PAGs or not, we can always look for this is assignable to role attribute, which is present on every group in our Azure AD, but it's set to true on the PAG groups. Every other group is, false. So just to basic understanding of, how does this RBAC work in Azure AD? So in this case, we do have a user on our screen, who's trying to sign into security.microsoft.com in order to look into an incident, manage some alerts on some endpoints, modify some device groups, what have you. This is where Azure Active Directory comes into play. You need to sign in. You need to be verified that you are who you say you are. We can also apply conditional access policies specifically for the RBAC group, which you are a member of, stating that you need to perform an MFA sign in each and every time. We don't allow persistent browser sessions, stuff like that. And once we've gone through the authentication method, yeah, we're signed into the Microsoft Defender UI with the corresponding permissions that we're carrying from the group, basically. So let's fingers crossed that the demo gods are with me today, but I'm gonna try to demonstrate how to do this. So we're signed into our Azure AD tenant, and we'll create a group to use for this RBAC implementation in Microsoft Defender. It does need to be either a security group, or it really needs to be a security group because we're going to use it as a privileged access group. So we can't use a Microsoft 365 group, even though the docs states that you could use a group for assigning permissions. But yeah, we'll need to keep it as a security group in this case. So we'll give it a name, Defender for Tier Analysts. And this is the important part, basically. We need to switch this to yes, which will lock the membership type to assigned. You can't have dynamic groups yet. I'm hoping that we won't see them at all, but that's just me. The owners and the members can be left as is right now because we're just demoing them. As well as the roles here. Like I said, we're just going to use this group for our role-based access control into the Microsoft 365 Defender. We're not going to use this group for assigning global administrative permissions or anything like that. So we'll just create a group basically with this is assignable to role set to true. And there we have our tier 3 analysts. role group created. Now, in the Microsoft 365 Defender UI, there are some limitations right now where we can't have the we don't have any RBAC roles configured for any other workload than Defender for Endpoint, basically. Not in the same granular fashion anyways. So we're just going to look at Defender for Endpoint right now, but the same kind of thought or strategy, what have you, will be able to be applied for Defender for Identity, Defender for Office 365 in due course of time. Because, well, trying not to say too much, I know stuff is coming, I just don't know when. So under permissions and roles, you'll see that we have the Azure AD roles. This is, the global administrator, security administrator, and anything like that. Email and collaboration roles. These are the ones, for insider risk management, organization management, stuff like that. We'll not be going to delve into these ones in this session because we're going to focus on the endpoint roles and groups. So prior to seeing all these roles created here, we have some advanced features we need to activate in our Microsoft 365 Defender instance. Let me see, where is it? No, I can't see it. Oh, wait. It's been hidden because the first time you set it up on the roles here, it says you need to enable roles to be able to use this feature, which has already been enabled in this tenant, so we can't see it here. I do have a blog series on this exact topic, so if you're interested in following the step-by-step guide, sign on to my blog at hedbergtech.se and just follow the click-through which is present there. So in Defender for Endpoint, we do get a administrator role created default. This one cannot be changed in any way. When it comes to the permission the role has, the only thing we can edit basically is the membership of that role. So as you can see here, we cannot edit anything. We can't edit the name, the description, permissions. The only thing we can grant or edit here is apply an Azure AD group for our Microsoft Defender for Endpoint administrator role. But given that we're going to take a look at how to configure this for the tier 3 analysts in this scenario, we'll be creating a new role. And here you can see that the view data is we can't unbox the view data option. So recently I had a quite large customer here in Sweden, I think maybe like 50,000 endpoints, give or take. And they said, well, we want to have our subsidiaries to be granted access into our Defender for Endpoint, looking at their own devices. And I was like, yeah, we can't do that because the security operations and threat and vulnerability management gives you way too much insight into the total stance of the Defender for Endpoint instance. So when it comes to these roles are strictly for the IT security personnel at your company or at your customer's company, or what have you. But here we'll just give this role a name, so we'll call it Tier 3 Analysts. Defender Endpoint. And as you can see here, we can give the role of a Tier 3 analyst their permissions in the Microsoft 365 Defender portal. So these two are ticked by default, and we can, of course, untick one of those, but we can't untick the other one. But when it comes to the active remediation options, we can, select which one should be present for this role. Given that these are the Tier 3 analysts guys, they should have as much permissions as possible. Alerts investigation, as you can see, they can manage alerts, initiate automated investigation, run scans, manage device tags, stuff like that. Security settings in the security center. They can onboard, offboard devices, configure alert suppression settings, stuff like that. And the most interesting one, I think, is the live response capabilities. With the basic ones, you can start a live response session, perform read-only commands on remote. But with the advanced one, we can actually initiate a PowerShell script to execute on the infected device or the device which is in this incident to try to mitigate whatever is happening. And here under assigned user groups, we can find the ones that we call let's see, Defender group that we created in Azure AD just a few minutes ago. Once we added this group here, the only ones which this role will be applied on is the members of the Defender for Endpoint Tier 3 Analysts group. With this, we also have the device groups in Defender for Endpoint. As you can see, there are some created here. We do have one subsidiary 1, where we do have the user access on this device group limited to the Defender for Endpoint Tier 1 analysts in this case. I think my screen is bugged out a little bit. But now we're adding the Tier 3 analysts to this device group as well. So this kind of setup for using RBAC really gives you the possibility and the opportunity to define the permissions specified for a specific device group, and the device group can be here like subsidiary 1. You could also have it for like these are all the HR devices. These are all the economic guys. They're kind of their devices. These are all the IT personnel devices. This can all be used to govern access to what kind of actions can I, as a Tier 3 analyst, take on, say, the IT guys' computers once they're infected. Just another quick note about the device groups. These can all be edited manually by using the Microsoft 365 Defender portal. but you can also tag the devices by using a registry key, which I'm sure that Katy can tell you guys more about, how to alter just this specific registry key using Intune. But in this tenant, we don't have that many devices at all. So we can just, as you can see here, we do have the device inventory. We just have the one here, which has some tags, subsidiary one, stuff like that. But we can manage these tags, create a new one called, HR department. Create new. So this one is tagged with both subsidiary one and HR department. And then we can, under the settings for endpoints, we can create a device group for the HR department to align with our role-based access control for the HR department, basically. So yeah, that's pretty much the easy way of how to implement this. And of course, why is it important? I cannot stress this enough. Don't use global administrator more than you really need to, because you're just asking for trouble, basically. As well with the other ones that are built in or default roles, these should try to keep them at, I don't know, 5 people tops for each and every role, because you do have the possibility to fuck shit up, basically. So things to remember: use the PAGs to make sure that help desk administrator, groups administrator, what have you, won't unintentionally or maliciously modify these RBAC groups. There are no PIM roles for this kind of scenario as of now. But with the identity governance features, we can keep a strict control of access anyways. So yeah, that's basically all I had for today. Any questions?
I've got one question for you on Twitter.
Yeah.
I don't know how that's the first. As a security architect, how do you keep up to date with all the security features? Because obviously it's a massive area. It's a very important area. How do you keep up to date with all the security features?
Whoa. I'm following quite a bunch of interesting people on Twitter. I'm following the Microsoft Security Response Center on Twitter as well. Keeping up to date with current threats, current exploits, and stuff like that. But when it comes to keeping up to date with the newest features, I'm trying to keep an eye out on docs, on Microsoft webcasts. LinkedIn it's a great forum for getting new knowledge delivered quite instantly to your face. So trying to keep updated on social media, where I'm trying my best to post this stuff out to everyone else. Oh, this is a new documentation, this is a new guideline for security best practices, whatever. So yeah, just try to stay up to date on social media and listening to user groups.
Yeah, like this one.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a question on chat. Any best practices or gotchas to keep an eye out for?
Yeah, like I said, when it comes to implementing role-based access control in these kind of scenarios, you got to remember to use PAGs or privileged access groups, just to make sure that you have strict control of who has access to which kind of role in Microsoft Defender. If you're just using Microsoft or just using any old security group in Microsoft 365, you do need to have very strict monitoring of or auditing on those groups. Whenever a user gets added inadvertently or maliciously or whatever, you do need to spark an alarm on that kind of thing.
Cool. Does anyone have any further questions? You can come off on mute.
Victor, you just mentioned alarms. In Microsoft 365, you've got alerts. Do alerts tie into this at the moment? So if somebody changes their role or somebody gives somebody some permission they shouldn't?
No. The alerts in Defender are basically, from the Defender point of view. So
okay.
The alerts in Microsoft 365 Defender is like, oh, this guy has Mimikatz on the computer. That's an alert. But when I try to, manipulate the membership of a group, that won't be, tagged as an alert in the Microsoft 365 Defender right now. So you do need to have either like Microsoft or Azure Sentinel or any other, CM log kind of tool to build those kind of alerts.
Okay.
I find within the Azure portal, you've got the identity security score feature, which picks up quite a lot, doesn't it? Especially around global admins, when you've got loads of global admins.
Yeah.
Nice little area within the Azure portal.
Yeah. And you do, if you're licensed for like with an Azure AD P1, you can always use the conditional access workbooks to make sure that your conditional access policies are working accordingly. So that's another best practice, not entirely coupled to implementing RBAC in Microsoft Defender, but use the tools that Microsoft presents you in the Azure portal for sure, because there are loads of help.
Thank you very much. I don't think there's any more questions, so if everyone can just come off on mute and give Victor a round of applause on a great session, please. That was really, really helpful. Thank you very much. If no one's got any more questions, I think you can have some time back tonight and go and relax. Thank you very much to both Victor and Katie. I think that's it. There's no more questions, so we'll call it a night or morning or afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Katie.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you to all those who've joined as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, guys.